For more than 60 years, she made the world laugh. But today, her voice carries a truth she can no longer hide. Behind the smiles, behind the memories, behind the woman America grew up loving, is a story. She's been quietly carrying a story about illness, loss, legacy, and the courage to say goodbye. What she finally revealed has left millions heartbroken, because it isn't just an update, it's the beginning of her last chapter. She had always been someone the world expected to hear from. For decades, her voice was part of people's lives, almost like a familiar friend who never failed to bring comfort. But slowly, without any announcement, she grew quieter. People first noticed it when she stopped appearing in interviews, then when she skipped events she normally never missed. At first, most fans assumed she was simply enjoying a peaceful retirement. She had earned that rest, after all. But her home, once filled with visitors, laughter, and constant activity, grew noticeably quieter. She still lived in the same place she had loved for years, but the usual energy around her had faded. Friends who visited said the house felt gentle, calm, but also unusually still, as if she was moving through her days more slowly than before. Those closest to her could tell something was not the same. She had always been strong, someone who pushed through difficult times without showing it openly. Her life was full of proof that she could rise above challenges. She came from a hard childhood, grew up with very little, and still fought her way into the world of entertainment when the odds were against her. She overcame losses, heartbreak, and personal struggles, yet continued to give people joy. Because of that history, her silence now felt strange. She was not someone who stepped back without a reason. Family members first noticed small changes. She would cancel simple outings, saying she was too tired. She would avoid phone calls, saying she needed to rest her voice. She said these things with a smile, trying to make it sound casual, but the people who truly knew her could sense a worry behind her words. Her husband began to see other signs too. She moved slower than before. She would sit down more often. She became quiet halfway through conversations, as if speaking for too long drained her energy. None of these things happened all at once. They built up slowly, almost quietly, until it became impossible to ignore. She tried hard to stay the same strong person everyone expected. When friends visited, she fixed her hair and put on her usual warm smile. She asked about other people, joked about small things, and did everything she could to keep her home filled with kindness instead of concern. But even while doing all that, she was struggling inside. Every time her voice cracked or her strength faded earlier in the day than she expected, she felt a heavy worry she didn't want to share. She had spent her whole life giving happiness, not asking for help. And that made it difficult to admit she was facing something she didn't fully understand. Fans who followed her closely noticed subtle signs. Her social media became quieter. She no longer posted updates about projects she once talked about often. Event organizers shared that she politely declined invitations without giving detailed reasons. People posted comments online asking if she was okay, but she never answered those questions directly. She didn't want attention on her health. She didn't want pity. She didn't want to cause worry. Privacy had always been important to her, and now she held onto it even more tightly. Still, inside her home, she felt a growing conflict. She wanted to protect herself from public pressure, but she also felt responsible for the people who cared about her. She had always respected her audience, and she knew disappearing without explanation would leave them confused. But she wasn't ready to talk about what she was feeling. They didn't even have answers for herself yet. One morning, this inner struggle reached a point she could no longer ignore. She woke up feeling unusually weak. It took her longer than usual to get out of bed. Even lifting her teacup felt heavier than normal. She tried to dismiss it, telling herself it was just part of aging, but a quiet fear settled in the back of her mind. Later that day, while talking to a close family member, her voice faded suddenly. It wasn't emotional, It was physical. She tried clearing her throat, tried speaking again, but the strength simply wasn't there. That moment frightened her. It was the first time she realized something deeper might be happening. Something she could not explain away with excuses. She sat alone that evening, thinking about her life. She remembered all the things she had fought through, the things she survived and kept moving forward from. She remembered times when she felt lost, but still found a way to smile, because that was who she was. Her past had shaped her strength, but now it also made her face the truth. She needed help, and she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Her family gently encouraged her to see a doctor. At first, she resisted, saying she didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but deep down, she already knew avoiding it wouldn't change anything. When she finally agreed to go, her family felt both relief and worry. They knew she was brave, but they also knew bravery cannot replace answers. Before the appointment, she spent the night thinking about the fans who had loved her for so long. She wondered what they would think if they knew she was struggling. She wondered how much she should tell them. She wondered if speaking publicly about her health would take away the image of strength people had always associated with her. She didn't want anyone to see her as fragile. She didn't want her final chapter to be defined by illness. Still, she knew she had to face reality. She went to the private consultation the next day, trying to stay calm, trying to believe the doctor would say it was nothing serious. But deep inside, she had a feeling she could not shake. Something was wrong. She could feel it, even before the tests began. Her hands were cold, her breath felt shallow. It was as if her body already understood what her mind was not ready to hear. And as she sat there, waiting for the doctor to explain her results, she had no idea that what she was about to learn would change everything she thought she knew about her future. When she arrived at the doctor's office, she tried to appear calm, but inside she felt a tightness in her chest. The room was quiet, and the soft background sounds only made her more aware of her own thoughts. She sat in the waiting area with her hands folded, looking down at the floor while trying not to imagine the worst. She had always been good at hiding fear, but this time it was harder. She felt a heaviness in the air, as if the truth she had tried to avoid was now waiting just a few steps away. The nurse called her name gently, and she followed her into a small room where she would finally hear what had been troubling her for months. The doctor walked in with her test results held tightly in his hands. His expression was serious, but kind, the kind of look someone gives before sharing news that cannot be softened. She knew immediately that whatever he was about to say would not be simple or easy. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure, even though her heart was beating faster than usual. The doctor began by asking a few questions about her symptoms, her energy levels, and how long she had been feeling this way. She answered honestly, even though she wished she could say the problems had only started recently. When he finally explained the diagnosis, her mind went quiet. She felt herself drifting for a moment, not because she didn't understand the words, but because she wasn't ready to accept. The doctor spoke slowly, giving her time to absorb each detail. She listened, nodding at the right moments, even though inside she felt a sharp mix of fear and sadness. She had spent her life being strong, holding herself together even during painful moments. But this was different. This was her own body telling her that she could no longer keep ignoring the signs. On the outside, she kept a soft, calm expression. She thanked the doctor, asked a few practical questions, and tried to behave like someone who was simply being given new instructions. But inside, she felt shaken. She thought of her family, her work, and the people who had loved her for so many years. She wondered how much time she had left before her strength faded even more. She wondered if she would still be able to finish the things she had promised herself she would complete. She wondered if she could keep the diagnosis private long enough to protect the people who looked up to her. Privacy had always been important to her. She had been open about many things in her life, but she had also learned that some battles were easier to fight alone. She didn't want the public to see her differently. She didn't want her illness to become the main thing people talked about. Most of all, she didn't want her fans to worry or feel sad for her. She felt a responsibility to protect them from her pain, the same way she had used humor to protect them from sadness throughout her career. She told herself that keeping the diagnosis private was the right thing to do. It wasn't deception, it was care. But keeping such a heavy truth to herself came with a burden she hadn't expected. She woke up each day knowing something that she couldn't share with millions of people who cared about her. Even when she smiled or joked, a part of her felt the weight of this secret pulling her down. Only a few close family members knew, and even then, she didn't tell them everything. She didn't want to place extra fear on their shoulders. Instead, she continued acting like she was doing fine, even on days when her energy dropped suddenly or her voice faded without warning. Her family encouraged her to slow down, to cancel her workload, and to focus on resting. They saw the tiredness in her eyes and the pauses she needed during conversations. They reminded her gently that she didn't have to carry everything alone, but she still pushed herself to work on her projects. She believed there were things she needed to finish, and she didn't want time to run out before she could complete them. She kept working on her personal writings, on old recordings, and on small commitments she had already made. Even when her hands shook slightly or her voice weakened, she kept going. This wasn't the first time she had pushed through pain. Her past was filled with moments where she hid her struggles so others wouldn't worry. Growing up with uncertainty had taught her to manage her emotions quietly. She faced loss at a young age, learned to handle disappointment without showing it, and built her career through strength others couldn't always see. She learned early that vulnerability could be misunderstood or judged. Because of that, she developed a habit of staying composed no matter how she felt inside. It was a survival skill, one that had helped her succeed for decades. But now, this pattern of hiding her worries made the diagnosis even harder to face. She felt like she had to stay strong, even though she was scared. She felt she had to keep smiling, even though she was struggling to accept the truth. She wanted to protect her fans, her family, and even her own sense of identity. She didn't want to be seen as fragile. She didn't want people to think she was giving up. She wanted to stay true to the person she had always been, someone who gave hope, not fear. As she left the doctor's office that day, she felt a strange mix of clarity and confusion. She knew exactly was the doctor's office, what the diagnosis meant, yet she still didn't know how she would deal with it. She walked slowly through the hallway, listening to the soft echo of her footsteps. She wasn't crying, but the sadness inside her felt heavy. She reached her car, sat quietly for a moment, and let the reality settle deeper into her mind. She thought the diagnosis was the hardest thing she would have to face, but she didn't know yet that something else was waiting for her. Something that would bring back memories she had buried long ago and open emotional wounds she never wanted to revisit. As her health weakened, memories she had kept buried for years began returning with a strength she wasn't prepared for. It started quietly at first. She would hear a song that her daughter used to love, and suddenly her throat would tighten. She would pass by an old photo without meaning to look at it, yet her eyes would still rest on it for longer than she expected. Loss had always been a part of her life, but she had learned to carry it with grace. Now, however, it felt heavier. The fear and uncertainty brought by her illness stirred old emotions she had carefully placed in the back of her mind. Instead of focusing only on her present, she found herself thinking deeply about her past, especially about the daughter she lost far too soon. She began revisiting her daughter's journals, letters, and small notes she had saved over the years. These items had been tucked away in boxes and drawers, things she tried not to look at often because they reminded her of pain she never fully healed from. But now she felt drawn to them. She spent afternoons sitting in her room, reading through these old pages with slow, gentle hands. Sometimes she found herself smiling at her daughter's handwriting, remembering her humor, her warmth, her energy. Other times, she felt tears fall before she even realized she was crying. Holding those old letters made her feel close to her daughter again, but it also reminded her of how much she had lost. She also listened to recorded messages, short voice clips her daughter had made years ago. Hearing her voice again was both comforting and painful. Some days, she replayed them just to hear those familiar tones, as if the sound alone could hold her together. Other days, she had to stop after only a few seconds because the emotion was too strong. These recordings stirred memories of moments they shared, of conversations they had, and of the future she once imagined for her child. She had lived many years since that loss, but grief changes over time. It doesn't disappear, it grows with you, shaping itself around whatever life brings next. Behind closed doors, she had emotional breakdowns she didn't let anyone see. She would sit quietly in her bedroom, tears running down her face, wondering why these memories felt so loud now. She wasn't someone who cried easily. She had learned long ago to be steady, especially in public, but alone, with no cameras, no audiences, and no expectations. She let herself feel everything she had been trying to hold back. There were nights she couldn't sleep because her mind kept returning to moments she wished she could relive. There were mornings when she woke up with her heart heavy, knowing that the sadness she had once learned to manage was resurfacing with new strength. Grief feels different near the end of life. When she lost her daughter, she was still in the middle of her own life. She had work, responsibilities, and people who needed her. She forced herself to move forward because she didn't have another choice. But now, as her own health weakened, she felt that same grief in a deeper way. It wasn't just the pain of losing a child, it was the realization that she was running out of time to feel close to her again. She wondered if she had said enough, done enough, or loved enough. She wondered what her daughter would say to her now, if she could speak. During this time, she opened up to a few close friends in a way she rarely did before. She talked about the memories that were returning, the guilt she still carried, and the sadness she had never spoken about fully. These friends listened quietly, giving her space to express the emotions she had held inside for years. She admitted that thinking about her daughter again made her feel fragile, and she hated feeling fragile. She had always been the strong one, the one who supported others. But her friends reminded her gently that strength doesn't mean ignoring pain. It also means being honest about what hurts. Even with these conversations, she struggled between staying strong and allowing herself to soften. She didn't want people to see her as weak. She didn't want sympathy or pity. But she also knew she wasn't the same person she used to be. Her illness had changed her body, and her memories were changing her heart. She felt torn between the version of herself she had always shown the world and the event in. The person she was becoming, a woman facing both physical decline and emotional reopening. Despite everything she was dealing with, she continued working. She kept writing, organizing her personal projects, and staying involved with small commitments. Work helped her stay grounded. It gave her a sense of purpose when her emotions felt overwhelming. It reminded her of who she was and what she had given to the world. Her refusal to stop working wasn't stubbornness. It was her way of managing the intense feelings rising inside her. When memories of her daughter became too heavy, focusing on her projects helped her breathe a little easier. She felt that finishing her work was another way of honoring the life she had built after her loss. Her emotional wounds were reopening, but they were also helping her understand herself in a new way. She wasn't running from her grief anymore. She was allowing it to sit beside her, even though it hurt. The love she had for her daughter had never faded, and now, as she faced her own health challenges, that love felt even stronger. The memories didn't break her. They reminded her of the strength she had used to survive before. But while the past was pressing heavily on her heart, something in her present life was quietly building, something she couldn't ignore much longer. It was a truth she had avoided for years. one she knew she would eventually have to face, and now it was coming closer than ever. As her health continued to weaken, her family slowly shifted their lives so they could be closer to her. It wasn't a formal decision, but something that happened naturally, out of love and worry. One of her relatives stayed for a few days, then another came to help the following week. Soon, they began taking turns staying in the house, so she was never alone for long. They rearranged work schedules, moved meetings, and reduced outside commitments just to be available. They didn't want to overwhelm her, but they also didn't want with her to face anything by herself. She had always been the one who took care of everyone else, so stepping into the role of caregivers felt new to them, but they did it without hesitation. Her husband made the biggest change. He stepped away from his music work and canceled several projects so he could be by her side every day. For years, he had been used to balancing his job with supporting her routines, but now his priority became clear. He wanted to be there for her from morning until night, helping with meals, watching her energy levels, and making sure she didn't push herself too hard. He tried to stay calm and steady, even on the days when her weakness frightened him. He didn't show that fear, because he knew she depended on his strength now more than ever. But even with all this care around her, there was tension she couldn't ignore. She had always been independent. She didn't like being fussed over. She felt uncomfortable when people treated her as fragile. When someone tried to help her stand up or walk across the room, she insisted she could do it herself. Sometimes she felt embarrassed, not because of her family, but because she wasn't used to needing help. Other times, she became frustrated with her body for slowing down. Her family understood this, but they still worried. They tried to find a balance between giving her space and making sure she was safe. Late at night, when the house was quiet, she and her husband would sit together and talk softly. These talks weren't about her illness or her fear. They were about small memories, old stories, or things they used to laugh about. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. They would simply sit in silence, holding hands, or sharing a gentle look. These moments felt important, as if silence itself had become a form of communication. Her husband could sense when she was tired, even if she didn't say a word. She could sense when he was worried, even though he tried to hide it. They also tried to keep small traditions alive. Every morning, she still drank her tea while sitting near the window. In the evenings, they watched old movies, just like they had done for years. On good days, she baked simple cookies, even if she needed help taking the tray out of the oven. Her family encouraged these routines because they brought comfort. They reminded her that not everything in life had changed. Even the smallest joys, like the warm smell of cookies or the softness of morning light, helped her feel normal for a while. But as the weeks passed, her family began noticing changes that she didn't want to admit. Her stamina during conversations grew shorter. Halfway through a story, she would pause to rest her voice. When she tried to walk from one room to another, she needed more time. Even simple tasks like sorting through papers or writing a short note left her tired. Sometimes she pushed herself too hard, pretending everything was fine, but her family could see through it. They knew her well enough to notice the tiny signs she was trying to hide. Her family didn't mention these changes directly because they didn't want to upset her. Instead, they helped quietly. If she looked tired, someone would offer a chair. If she dropped something, someone nearby picked it up gently. They made small adjustments around the house, placing items closer to her, setting up softer lighting, and keeping the environment calm without making her feel like she was losing control. But even with their careful approach, she could sense that things were different. She could feel their eyes watching her a little more closely, their voices becoming softer when they spoke to her. As she observed her family adjusting their lives around her, she began to understand something she had not fully accepted before. She had been thinking so much about her fans and how to prepare them for the changes in her life. But now, she realized her family needed preparation too. They weren't just watching. her illness unfold. They were experiencing their own emotional journey. They were facing the fear of losing someone they loved deeply. She knew she had to give them reassurance, comfort, and honesty, even though it was difficult for her to speak openly about the future. She started having small conversations with each of them, not dramatic or heavy, but gentle and honest. She talked about gratitude, about memories they had shared, about the things she appreciated most in her life. She didn't talk about death directly. Instead, she focused on love, support, and peace. These conversations weren't planned. They simply happened when the moment felt right. She felt it was important to give them emotional strength, just as she had done her whole life. Her family responded with quiet understanding. They accepted her words with warmth, even when their hearts felt heavy. They didn't want to imagine life without her, but they also knew they needed to listen. Being prepared didn't remove the pain, but it gave them something real to hold on to. It reminded them that even during her sickness, she was still guiding them with the same steadiness she had always shown. Even with all the support around her, she could sense that a larger choice was approaching, something she couldn't avoid much longer. Her illness had changed her daily life, but this next decision would go far beyond her home or her family. It would shape how the world remembered her, how her story would be told, and how her final chapter would unfold. Something bigger was waiting, something she would soon have to face head-on. When she realized her health was changing in ways she could no longer ignore, she began thinking about what she still wanted to leave behind. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was a quiet understanding that came to her one afternoon while she was sorting through old boxes filled with scripts, letters, and photographs. As she held these pieces of her life, she understood that her career had touched generations, and she didn't want any part of it to be lost. That was when she decided to start a legacy project, something that would gather her work, her memories, and her message into one place. She wanted to digitize everything she could: old footage that never aired, handwritten notes, behind-the-scenes moments, personal letters she had written to friends and co-stars. She felt this was the right time to make sure her story would stay alive long after she was gone. Working on this project brought out emotions she hadn't felt in years. As she watched old clips of her performances, she sometimes found herself laughing so hard she had to stop the video to catch her breath. Other times, the memories made her cry quietly. Seeing her younger self on screen reminded her of how fast life had moved. She remembered the excitement she felt during her early years, the friendships she built, and the moments when everything seemed possible. She also remembered the difficulties she had faced, the struggles behind the scenes, and the nights when she questioned whether she had the strength to keep going. Revisiting all of this made her feel grateful, but it also reminded her of how much she had lived through. The archivists she worked with treated her project with great care. They came to her home and spent long days scanning documents, organizing files, and transferring old tapes into digital formats. They asked her questions about certain dates, events, or people who appeared in the footage. She answered as much as she could, but sometimes her voice would fade and she had to take breaks. Still, she remained determined. She didn't want her sickness to stop her from finishing something so important to her. On days when she felt stronger, she recorded short voiceovers to explain certain memories or provide context for rare clips. Even though speaking for long periods was difficult, she pushed through it because she wanted her fans to hear her voice one more time, telling her story in her own words. There were moments during the project when she felt overwhelmed. Looking back on her life so closely made her realize how deeply she had been connected to her work. Fans often said she made them laugh, but she now understood how much they had given her in return. Their support carried her through tough times, and their love helped her heal from losses she never fully recovered from. This understanding motivated her even more. She wanted her final gift to be something meaningful, something fans could hold on to and share with their children and grandchildren. She wanted people to know her, not just as a performer, but as a person who cared about them and appreciated every moment she had in the spotlight. As she reflected on her career, she remembered the highs and lows clearly. She remembered the joy of creating new characters, performing live, and working with talented people who pushed her to grow. She also remembered the pressure of deadlines, the long hours, and the personal challenges she had to hide from the public eye. Fame had brought her many beautiful experiences, but it also demanded strength she didn't always feel. Looking through her archives reminded her that the hardest moments often shaped the best parts of her work. She felt proud of what she had created, and she hoped future generations would learn from her journey not just the success, but the resilience it took to get there. Preserving her legacy meant more to her than fame or recognition. It was about ensuring that young people who dreamed of working in comedy, acting, or writing would have access to the lessons she had learned. She wanted them to see her mistakes and her triumphs. She wanted them to understand that a meaningful life isn't defined by awards, but by the effort you put into doing something you love. She felt that sharing her story honestly could guide others, giving them confidence to pursue their own paths. The belief made her work on the project with even more dedication, even when her body felt too tired to continue. During this time, she also had emotional conversations with younger artists she had been mentoring privately for years. Some came to visit her, and others spoke to her through phone calls or messages. She encouraged them to stay true to their talents, to be kind, and to remember that success means nothing if you lose yourself in the process. Many of these young performers told her how much she inspired them and how her work had shaped their own goals. Hearing these words touched her deeply. It made her feel that her life had not only entertained people, but had also given others the strength to chase their dreams. She tried her best to hide how tired she became after each session of recording or sorting through archives. She didn't want the archivists or the young artists to see her struggle. She wanted the focus to stay on the message she was leaving behind, not on the sickness she was fighting. But there were moments when she had to pause, close her eyes, and take a slow breath before continuing. She knew her time and energy were limited, which made every finished piece of the project feel like a small victory. She poured her heart into this work because she wanted it to be her last meaningful offering. She wanted fans to have something personal to remember her by, something that showed the real journey behind the laughter. But as the project moved forward, and more people around her became aware of her long hours and fading strength, the outside world began to notice changes she could no longer hide. The video she recorded was never meant to be public. She had filmed it on a quiet afternoon, sitting in her living room when she felt a sudden need to speak honestly. She didn't plan it, and she didn't rehearse anything. She simply pressed record and spoke from her heart. She talked about her health in a soft voice, explained that she had been struggling more than people knew, and thanked everyone for their love over the years. She didn't expect it to reach millions of people. But once a family member shared it with her permission, it spread faster than anyone imagined. Within minutes, the video appeared on social media, and within hours, it went viral across the world. People replayed her trembling voice, noticed the changes in her appearance, and immediately understood that this wasn't just a normal update, it was something much deeper. Fans reacted instantly. Many posted old photos, videos, and clips from her most famous moments. Others created tributes that showed her best scenes, her funniest jokes, and the moments that made them laugh during their hardest times. Comments poured in from people who had grown up watching her. They wrote about how her humor helped them through divorce, illness, loneliness, and the loss of loved ones. Some people said she reminded them of their own mothers or grandmothers. Some wrote that they watched her shows with their families every weekend. Others shared that they had named their children after one of her characters. It became clear that her influence had reached far beyond entertainment. For many people, she was a source of comfort, not just a performer. Celebrities reacted with the same emotion. Women who had followed her path in comedy posted long messages, thanking her for opening doors that once seemed impossible to enter. Younger comedians called her their first teacher, even though they had never met her in person. Well-known actors, hosts, and writers released statements about how she had inspired them. Some talked about her kindness behind the scenes. Others shared stories about the advice she had given them when they were still new in the industry. Even people who had only worked with her once remembered the joy she brought to the room. She had touched colleagues in the same way she had touched fans, with humor, gentleness, and truth. Her protégés, the young artists she had mentored privately, spoke about her with deep emotion. They shared how she had guided them quietly, without expecting recognition. They talked about how she had encouraged them to stay authentic, telling them that the world needs honest voices. Many of them said they would carry her lessons for the rest of their lives. Hearing them speak so openly made her realize how much she had shaped the generation behind her. She had always hoped to make a difference, but seeing it reflected back at her in real time felt overwhelming. The public reaction began to feel like a form of grieving, even though she hadn't officially said goodbye. People acted as if they were preparing themselves for a loss they didn't want to face. They were sending messages of love, but those messages were also filled with fear. Fear of losing someone who had been part of their lives for decades. It was unusual to see so much grief appear before the final moment, but it showed how deeply people cared. Strangers who had never met her were crying as they watched the video. They felt like they were losing a family member, not a celebrity. She watched all of this from her living room, sitting in the same chair where she had recorded the message. Her family showed her the comments, the tributes, the videos, and the statements. At first, she couldn't believe it. She never thought her words would reach so many people so quickly. She never imagined the world would stop and listen with such attention. Seeing the love people sent her brought her to tears more than once. She felt a deep warmth that made her realize how many lives she had touched without even knowing it. While watching the tributes, she remembered moments from her past when she doubted her worth. She remembered times when she questioned whether her work mattered, whether people cared, or whether she had made any difference at all. She had experienced failure, criticism, and uncertainty just like anyone else. There were nights she wondered if she should step away, if she was still good enough, or if people would forget her one day. Now, seeing the reaction to her video, those doubts began to fade. The love coming from millions of people gave her a sense of peace she hadn't felt before. She finally understood that her life's work had meaning far beyond her imagination. This emotional wave also brought a shift inside her. She began to realize that this might be her final conversation with the world, not because she wanted it to be, but because her strength was fading faster than she expected. She felt her body growing weaker each day. Speaking became harder. Standing for long periods tired her quickly. She knew she couldn't keep sharing long messages. She knew her energy would not allow her to stay connected the way she used to. The video had reached so many people that she felt she had already spoken her heart. She wondered if she would ever have the strength to speak publicly again. But her story wasn't finished yet. She had been working on something privately, something she hadn't shared with anyone outside her family. It was a message she wrote slowly over weeks, a message she wanted the world to hear only at the right time. She kept it folded in a drawer, waiting for the moment she felt was right. She knew her journey was moving toward its final chapter, and she wanted her farewell to be something meaningful, honest, and full of love. And although the world believed they had already heard her final words, she wasn't done yet. She still had one last message, a farewell she wrote in secret, waiting for the moment when she would finally share it. The day she finally decided to finish her letter started quietly. There was no special date, no dramatic moment pushing her forward. She simply woke up, knowing it was time. Her health had been slipping, and she could feel her strength leaving her little by little. She sat near the window, where she always drank her morning tea, holding a notebook in her hand. The sunlight touched her softly, and the room felt calm, almost like it understood what she was about to do. She took a slow breath, opened the notebook, and began writing again, continuing the letter she had been working on for weeks. The writing process was emotional from the very beginning. She had already written several drafts, each one filled with crossed-out lines and tear marks. Some days, she wrote only a few sentences before needing to stop because her hands trembled or her eyes filled with tears. Other days, she wrote more, letting the words flow until her voice grew too weak to keep reading them aloud. The letter was personal in a way she had never spoken publicly before. She allowed herself to feel everything she had been carrying, the love, the regrets, the memories, and the wisdom she wanted to leave behind. As she rewrote certain lines, she thought about the people who had been part of her life. She wrote about her family first. She thanked her husband for standing by her through every hardship and every joy. She told him how much his steady support had meant to her, especially in these final months. She wrote messages to her other family members too, wanting them to feel her love long after she was gone. She didn't write in dramatic language or try to make her words sound poetic. She wrote honestly, like a mother, a wife, and a grandmother who simply wanted her family to know she loved them deeply. She also wrote to her fans. She didn't know how to say goodbye to millions of people she had never met, but still cared for. She tried to explain how their laughter, support, and devotion had shaped her life in ways she could never fully express. She thanked them for welcoming her into their homes through television screens, for growing up with her, for sharing her jokes, and for treating her like someone familiar. She wrote that their kindness had carried her through many painful moments, and that their love had given her strength during times she felt lost. Writing those lines made her cry, but it also made her smile. It reminded her of how much she had received from the world. She didn't avoid her regrets. She wrote honestly about the things she wished she had done differently. Moments when she worked too much, times she didn't slow down to take care of herself, and memories she sometimes replayed when she couldn't sleep. She didn't want her letter to be perfect. She wanted it to be real. She believed that sharing her regrets might help someone else avoid the same mistakes. She wrote about the importance of forgiveness, both giving it and accepting it. She wrote that life is too short to hold on to bitterness, and that healing begins when a person decides to let go. One of the hardest parts of the letter was the section she wrote to her younger self. She imagined her younger self standing backstage during her early career, nervous and unsure. She wrote comforting words, telling that young girl to trust her instincts, to believe she belonged in the world, and to hold on to kindness, no matter how difficult life became. She told her younger self not to be afraid of failure, because every setback would lead to something meaningful. She also wrote that strength doesn't mean hiding pain. It means surviving it and still choosing love. There were small symbolic gestures she wanted to include. She added a line about tugging her ear, the same gesture she had done for years on her show. She knew fans recognized it as her sign of love, and she wanted it in the letter as a final reminder that her heart had always been with them. She wrote a short part of her favorite song lyrics, not a full verse, but a simple reminder of the tune that had closed many episodes of her show. She also explained her belief about laughter, something she had lived by her entire life. She wrote that laughter doesn't erase pain, but makes it easier to carry. She said she hoped people would continue to smile even after she was gone. Writing these thoughts brought her peace. She felt that her life had not been perfect, but it had been meaningful. She accepted that its arc was not tragic, but beautiful. She had loved deeply, worked hard, survived loss, and given joy to others. She had lived a life that mattered. This acceptance made her letter flow more gently toward the end. Instead of focusing on fear, she focused on gratitude. She wrote that she wasn't afraid of what came next. She felt ready, not because she wanted to leave, but because she knew she had lived the best she could. When she finished writing the final lines, she closed the notebook and rested her hands on top of it. She stared out the window for a long time. The sky looked soft, and she watched the light shift across her living room. She felt calm. She felt complete. She whispered a small thank you to the life she had lived. Then she called a family member and told them the letter was ready. It was time to prepare it, to make sure people would hear her last words when the moment came. She didn't know exactly when the message would be shared, but she knew it would happen soon. She knew her strength was fading quickly. She knew she had said everything she needed to say. The letter wasn't just a goodbye. It was a gift, a reminder, and a final embrace for the millions of people who had shared their lives with her. And as the world prepared to hear her final words, she left behind something no illness could ever take: a legacy of laughter that refuses to fade.